don't check out on me this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about leadership. And the reason I say don't check out on me is I know some people will sit around and say, well, I'm not a leader. But I will tell you that if anyone here were to tell me that, I wouldn't believe you. And it's not because I would think that you're lying to me as much as I would just think that you're wrong. But I think that there's leadership in all of us. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And also, I'm going to do this primarily, we won't start there, but primarily through Matthew 18. But don't get scared if you've been to one of my teachings where I do a book. We are going to do the entire chapter of Matthew 18, but not like how I do on a Thursday. So we won't be here for 6 hours. So, let's get started. So in Mark chapter 9, verses 33 through 37, obviously this is talking about Jesus, and it says, "Then he came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, 'What was it you disputed among yourselves on the road?' But they kept silent, for on the road they had disputed among themselves who would be the greatest. And he sat down, called the 12, and said to them, 'If anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all.' Then he took a little child and set him in the midst of them. And when he had taken him in his arms, he said to them, 'Whoever receives one of these little children in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me.'" So the disciples were debating amongst themselves and having this argument, and it came about because of a lot of various reasons. But they're having an argument, and they're saying, like, who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom? And Jesus' response to who would be the greatest is that if you desire greatness, you should be last and the servant of all. So this same passage from Mark is also found in Matthew 18, but there's a slight difference between the two. The fact that Jesus' summary statement from Mark, that you should be the servant of all, is not included in Matthew. But what is included in Matthew is the breakdown of displaying how to be the servant of all. So it's one of those weird things. You have to kind of go to Mark to get the summary statement, but then you can go back to Matthew to figure out how it actually looks like in real life. There's also another difference. So let's go to Matthew 18:1, and this is what I think is funny. In Matthew 18:1, it says, "At that time, the disciples came to Jesus saying, 'Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?'" Now, we know that this is the same passage because, and you can leave both of these up here. We know this is the same passage, the same events from Mark, because the next thing that Jesus is going to do is take the child and bring him in, just like it said in Mark. But what's funny is Matthew, which is written by one of the disciples who would have been a part of the argument, writes it as, "We came to Jesus saying, 'Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?'" Luke, which was not written by one of the disciples, which was an account of what really happened. No, I mean, Matthew really happened. It says they were arguing and Jesus had to discern that they were arguing and kind of call them out on it. But Matthew, as being a part of it, leaves out the argument. So I don't know why. I find things like that when you see the personality of the disciples and things coming through. I always think that's fun, whatever. Anyways, what we know, or what I would say is everything that happens in Matthew 18 is an answer to this question. And this is the reason why I know this. So this is, off topic a little bit, but here's a Bible study principle for you, is that Matthew 18:1 says, "At that time, the disciples came saying, 'Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?'" So they ask a question. The rest of Matthew 18 is filled with Jesus talking to them, giving various stories, parables, taking a child out of the midst, making an illustration, doing all these things. And then in Matthew 19, verse 1, it says, "Now it came to pass, when Jesus had finished these sayings, that he departed from Galilee and went off." So you can see the flow of it, that this is all one conversation. So all of Matthew 18 falls between these two events. Here's a question, and then when he had finished basically answering the question, they move on. And so that's how we can know that Matthew 18 isn't just a bunch of disconnected stories and disconnected parables. They're all going back to one principal thing. Jesus is answering the question, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And if we read Mark first, we know the summary. You need to be the servant of all. So therefore, we can make the assumption, I don't think it's too far of a jump, that as we look at these stories and things in Matthew 18, we're learning how to be a servant. We're learning how to be the servant of all. So, Jesus' definition of greatness. And within this chapter, I see 6 main points that Jesus brings out. I don't think that this is exhaustive of leadership at all, because Jesus has a lot of other things to say on leadership. Like, for instance, when he's washing the disciples' feet, doing some other things. They're not covered in Matthew 18, but we're going to limit it to just being a 6-point sermon, which is like double what you would normally get, if you go to a typical place and they do a 3-point sermon. So, hey, that's like 3 extra points for free. So the first way that Jesus says how a leader should serve is like a child. So Matthew 18, verses 1 through 5. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them and said, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever receives one such child in my name receives me." You might remember that was exactly came from Mark, which is how we know we can tie these passages together. First of all, when Jesus says that in order to come into the kingdom of heaven, you have to become like a child, he does not mean be childish, right? Paul says, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I did childish things, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. He's not talking about being mature. He's not talking about those kind of things. So what is he talking about? He's talking about the innocence, the purity of small children, of how they believe. Like when an adult comes to them and tells them something, they believe it. Like, how easy is it to convince your kids that Santa is real? Like, it's like people do it all the time. And, and he's not. So like, but there's this trust. Sorry, spoiler alert. Sorry. But there's this trust that they have in their parents, that if my parents are telling me something, it's real, right? They just believe it. You told that to me, so I believe it. And that's how Jesus is like saying, that's how we need to be with the Father. That when the Father tells us something, when he writes it in his word, when Jesus says something, that we come in with this childlike faith that says, I will just believe it because you told it to me, not because of any such experience or whatever else, but because you told it to me, I'll believe it. I also see that he goes kind of specifically because he points out this child and says, whoever becomes like a child, but he kind of specifically says that in order to be greatest, not only do you need to be like a child, but as humble as a child. If you get a bunch of small children together and, at some point this will change as they start to get older, but the little small children don't go around thinking like, well, who's the best and who's the greatest and everything. It's just, they're just interacting with each other. There's a humility there. The thought of who's the greatest hasn't even entered their mind. And I can't help but think, since they were arguing about this, that's one of the reasons Jesus opened with this. The disciples, children aren't concerned about that. Children are dependent and they recognize their dependence. They don't, a child is not unabashed to come up to an adult and go, tie my shoe. Or, I can't, I need that food off that table given to me. Yeah. If there's a cookie there, Atticus is not unashamed to ask for it. Children recognize their dependence. For some reason, as adults, we start to get to this place of like viewing independence as a great thing. Well, there is a certain value to independence on certain levels, but never is there any value in becoming independent from God. In fact, that's not only not valuable, that's like destructive. Mm-hmm. That's the antithesis of it. But for some reason, even though we might know that intellectually, we still have the thoughts of what can I do on my own? How can I do this? This kind of goes a little bit back into last week's thing on my grace is sufficient for you and my power is made perfect in weakness. We would rather not be like Paul, who says, I boast in my weaknesses because then his strength can come through me. We say, well, what can I just do in my own strength? Because at least I know I can do that. There's this streak of independence that runs through us that children don't have. Children are willing to be seen as lower. They don't think of it as an insult to have to sit at the children's table. There comes a time in growing up, if you ever have the family get-togethers where it's like, well, we have the nice table set up, but then we have to put the card table over here and the children have to sit there. I don't know what age it is, but there's some age where the child is like, can I just sit at the other table? I gotta sit at the big table, right? But at some age, they don't see that as anything. Like sitting at the children's table is absolutely fine. They're willing to be seen as lower than other people, deemed as less important. And I'm not saying children are less important. I'm saying that they're willing to be seen that way given lesser things. Children just have that. They don't think about it. They're not concerned with their own status. And then Jesus says something else. He says, not only do we need to become like children, but we need to receive those child. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. And willing to receive or accept someone else as a child. In other words, are we willing in our ministry, in our lives, in our friendships, in our relationships to accept someone who's weak or vulnerable or needy or helpless, someone who needs us? And Jesus is like, we accept others as children. We become like children in our relationship to God, but we're willing to accept the small, the vulnerable, the helpless, the needy. And we bring those in. And we're not just looking to surround ourselves with other people that we consider great. This is one of the views of the world. In fact, you'll hear this in seminars all the time. If you want to become great, surround yourself with other great people. Surround yourself with greatness is the mantra of the world. Jesus says, surround yourself with the vulnerable and the weak, and you'll be seen as great in the Father's eyes. And it's very different. So now I would say, too, that we need to have people in our lives that are helping to build us up and bring us up. But we need to be willing to accept those into our lives that we also can help build up and bring up and strengthen. Children, they're willing to play with any other child. They don't go out and go, this one's too needy, this one's too this one's too that. They just walk up and say, you want to play? Like, we'll play however you want to play. It doesn't matter. And they're good to go. So as leaders, and this is the principle that I would walk away from this with, is that as leaders, we must be humble. Not only in the view of who we are, but also in our view of who we consider worthy to serve with us or for us to serve. A leader can never look at someone and say, they're not worth my time. And I've had leaders tell me that. I've had someone tell me, and this was in a church ministry setting, where they said, be careful whom you choose to serve, because some people will do nothing but suck up your time. And I don't know, but my Bible says, then that's the person I want in my circle. Right? Because, yeah, but that must mean there's some need. There's something that's not being filled in their lives. And Jesus says he can meet every need. So how can I show Jesus to them? It needs to be the attitude, as opposed to, I just can't deal with them. Too much time. That's what Jesus is saying. Which brings us into principle number 2. Do not lead other people into sin. This seems like this should be hey, we should know not to do that, right? In Matthew 18, 6-7, it says, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and be drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe to the world for temptations to sin. For it is necessary that temptations come, but woe to the one by whom the temptation comes. So, first of all, you can see the seriousness with which Jesus presents not leading other people into sin. Don't tempt people to sin. He basically says it's better for you to die a terrible death than for you to do this. So he's not treating this as a light subject. I don't think that any reasonable leader, well, maybe up until 2020, but I don't think that any reasonable leader is sitting around purposely trying to think of how can I get other people to sin. Like, I don't think that that's the mindset that Christian leaders, when I say leaders, I'm talking about in the church, right? I don't have to say this every time. But when we model sin in our lives, we tempt and push others to sin. And by that, modeling sin, I just mean, what are the things that we do as leaders that are pushing that line, that are behaviors that we know other people may struggle with, but we say, well, whatever. There's a saying that a pastor of mine used to have. This was Daniel Williams back when I was at Redeemer. It's a long time ago. And he used to say this all the time at leader conferences. He would say, what a leader does in moderation, their followers will do in excess. So he was like, so if you as a leader, and he would do this, because he'd break down with our leader conferences, he'd say, so if you as a leader tell a slightly off color joke, expect your followers to tell way off color jokes, right? Whatever you do in moderation is a license for them to do in excess. And that always stuck with me. When we get right up to the line or we play with sin, we may cause others to sin and push them into that. That church that made all over the news for that crazy Easter service that they did. One of the quotes when they interviewed the pastor about why would you put on such a crazy presentation, and for anyone that happened to follow that knows what I'm talking about. They asked him, why would you do such a crazy presentation? And his answer was, we want to do everything right up to the line of sin to get people into the kingdom of God. Like, that's a crazy mindset. That's a weird, does that sound like any teaching you've heard from Jesus? We should do everything that pushes right into the line of sin to get, no. Jesus was like, be pure, avoid sin. We'll actually get into some sayings real soon about that. But I don't know about this whole get up right to the line. He said, maybe it'd be better for you to have a millstone hung around your neck and thrown into the sea and drown than do what you're doing, So, he was serious about this. We don't want to do that. I remember the same pastor, he also said this. He told a story of how he had a whole bunch of Christian friends, and they were all going to go see a movie that seemed like a, fairly harmless whatever movie, but, just a regular movie. And he felt the Spirit of God tell him that he could not go see it. And then there was something else, I think it had to do with music, that God told him not to listen to some certain artist or whatever that was popular at the time. And he said, and I whined to God and I complained to him, you seem to be letting all my Christian friends do this. And he said the answer that he got from God was, others may, you may not. And it was this thing of as you progress in your maturity, God may call out some things on to you that are convictions for you that are not across the board. There are some things God has just named as sin. Everybody, this is sin, right? We all should not be murdering people. That's across the board. But there are some things, some convictions that God may give you as you're maturing in your faith, as you're doing things where God says, I don't want you to do this. And that's okay. That's a sign of God raising you up and bringing you up. But when we compromise teaching truth to be liked because of fear of others or opinions of others, we can cause others to sin. In terms of this thing of others may, you may not, or what a leader does in moderation, followers do in excess, I'm reminded of Paul in 1 Corinthians 8:13, and he was talking about people that brought meat sacrificed to idols into the marketplace. And so the whole background of this statement is that when you went into the marketplace to buy meat, you did not know if that meat had previously been offered to an idol, because they would take meat, offer it to an idol. Amazingly, the false gods didn't eat the meat. So then instead of letting it go bad, they'd take it off the altar and go serve it up in the market. And so you could buy it. And then people were like, should you eat meat if it had previously been dedicated to a false god. And Paul's response was, yeah, why not? Let's have a barbecue. It's fine. Because there is no such thing as a false god. So like there's no power in them. It's fine. But then he made this statement. He said, but in 1 Corinthians 8:13, therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. Paul was willing to become a vegetarian. And I can imagine that's like asking Anthony to become a vegetarian. Or Mark. So that's like saying, but he was saying, there's nothing on this earth so good that it is worth causing someone else to stumble in their faith over. There is no movie so good, no television show so good, no whatever so good that if it's going to cause someone else to sin to see me doing this, that it's worth it. And that's what he's saying. You see, as leaders, it is very important to consider the effects that our behavior will have on others. Now, I want you to understand, because we in this church talk a lot about PBA, right? Performance-based acceptance. This is not what I'm talking about. Understand that what you do will never affect your relationship with God. That's not what I'm talking about. You're not going to, like with Paul, eat meat and cause him to lose his relationship with God. You're not going to see a movie, watch a TV show, and God's going to hate you. God's going to disown you. God's going to, there is none of that. Just get that out of your mind. God loves you. There's nothing in this world that can separate you from the love of God. There's not even demons and principalities and powers can separate you. Nothing can separate you from the love of God. That's not what I'm talking about. But as you mature in your faith and we become leaders, one of the signs of maturity is that we begin to consider how our actions affect the lives of others. Is what I'm doing helping to bring the people around me, the people God has put in my sphere of influence, is it helping them become more righteous? Or, well, we're all righteous before God. That's a bad example. Is it helping them come closer to God, to trust in God more, to be built up, encouraged, and strengthened in their faith? Or am I weakening them? Am I tempting them? Am I pushing them towards sin or to something that God shouldn't do? It's funny to me how Tina and I both came to a place when we got married, right when we got married, we said, well, God gave us a conviction to just not watch rated R movies. We just won't do it. And so that was something God gave us. He doesn't give that to everyone. And I'm sure that there are plenty of rated R movies that would be fine to watch on some level, whatever. But God told us not to do it. So that's our own personal conviction. It is amazing how when you tell that to other believers, the first thing they want to do is tell you a rated R movie that you should watch because that one's okay. I'm sure it is. I'm sure Braveheart is a lovely film. But when I just told you that God told us not to, why would you make that suggestion? And I try, the people that have done that, they have pure intent. Honestly, they're just thinking, but I think you would like this one, and just know it wouldn't really bother you. But the point is, consider what God is showing. How am I having an effect? If someone has a conviction, we kind of know this about alcohol. You have the idea, if someone says, hey, I've struggled with alcoholism, we then don't say invite them to a bar. People kind of know that one. Well, the same is true when anyone has struggled with past sins, or if someone has said this is a conviction of God, let's not tempt them. Let's not bring them in. And that's what Jesus is saying. All right, which brings us to our third point of leadership, is living a life of purity. We are a leader by living a life of purity. In Matthew 18, verses 8 through 9, Jesus says, if your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life maimed. I don't know why I wrote or maimed. It shouldn't. Oh, life lame or maimed. Man, I can't read today. It is better for you to enter into life lame or maimed rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into the everlasting fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life with one eye rather than having two eyes and to be cast into hellfire. This verse is pretty self-explanatory. You can hear the passion from Jesus in this verse. Now, he is not talking about, obviously, self-mutilation, right? But what he's talking about is that living free from sin may require sacrifice. That at some point, we want to make a decision in our lives to avoid sin. That's part of spiritual maturity. When we're first saved, you don't expect on day one that like, boom, all my sin is, like I will never sin again. John talks about that in his letters to the churches later on, in the New Testament. He's like, that doesn't always happen. But as we progress in maturity, God is bringing us to that place, right? So we're living this life of purity, and that can mean sacrifice. Now, Jesus talked about sacrificing, your hand, or your foot, your eye, these things that lead us into sin. What I would say is, because I don't believe he's talking about self-mutilation, he's talking about sacrifices. What are the things that like maybe we do need to sacrifice that cause us to sin? Do we have to sacrifice something we watch, something we listen to, who we are influenced by, what we allow to come into our lives? Tina and I had a conversation. We were talking about these different people that have wildly different views from us and that have done some things. So for instance, there's different people that I follow on YouTube, and many of them are like Christian apologeticists, because I like that stuff. Well, they've all been talking about something that happened with on Mr. Beast's channel. And I don't know if you know who Mr. Beast is. I think at this point he's the most popular guy on YouTube. I'm not positive if he still is. At one point he was, like several 100 million subscribers or something, whatever. I've never actually watched his channel. But one of the people that he has, like, I guess a team of people, and one of the people on his team is a guy who is married with 2 children, and he's decided to transition to become a woman. And we were talking about, like, how does that happen? And part of that happens because there's a lot of messages being told to us right now especially that if you are a white Christian male, you are the problem. And this is a message that comes in. And so if you want to be special, if you want your life to matter, there has to be something about that. And I think that a lot of these messages are coming into this guy, and now he's transitioned because he was almost out of a guilt and a feeling of needing to be special and needing something in his life. And he's destroying his family, wrecking his kids, splitting the opinions of people over this channel, which probably won't hurt his channel, and he'll probably make it grow. But, just causing complete upheaval in his life. Why? And my guess is, and I don't believe that he's a believer or ever was or whatever, but I would say it's because of what messages is he allowing into his life. We're seeing a change in things like the number of people who identify as something in the LGBTQ rainbow. We're seeing that number explode in growth. Is it because more people are, or is it because more people are hearing messages that are confusing them? And so this is where I would say the majority of it is, well, anyways, in the discussion that Tina and I had, the conclusion that we came to was you are in control of the messages you hear. But some people are addicted to hearing messages from the world. And I would say that if you want to live a life of purity, one of the steps to Christian maturity and one of the steps to greatness is to cut off how much messages you allow the world to give you. And for some of us, that might mean getting rid of the news. I would rather live an uninformed life than a life of sin, to be honest, when it comes down to it. And again, this is kind of what?
Doom scrolling.
Is that what it's called?
That's a term.
Doom scrolling. I've never heard that. Yeah, I like that. But this is, and this is kind of a hard lesson, but Jesus gave some hard lessons. We like to talk a lot about the grace of God. We like to talk, and his grace is absolutely real. It's by his grace. In fact, he says it's only by grace that we can even hope to live righteously. The fact that he made you righteous is the power to live the way according that he made you. But, we have to make choices in our life every day as to what are we going to live from. Trying to live from this power from our old self, or trying to live from the power of the Spirit that's in us and our renewed, regenerated self when we're born again. I'll also tell you this. While sin also does not separate you from the love of God, it does have the power to make you feel guilty and ashamed, which comes from the enemy, not from God. And that can cause you to feel disconnected from God. And it's not that God has pulled away from you, it's that you've pulled away from God. And the other thing that I'll say about sin in our lives is simply this. While the Bible is clear that sin does not separate us from God or make us unworthy in his eyes. Like, you're saved, you sin, God doesn't kick you out of the kingdom, right? We can agree with that. But the Bible also says that leaders are held to a higher standard. In 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 13, I'm not going to put that all up, but you can look at it if you want. You'll also find the same thing in Titus. But it gives a list of the qualifications for being an elder or a deacon. This is basically the Bible saying, here's things that you need to do if you want to serve in a leadership position in a church. That list is filled with a whole bunch of things that are like, don't sin, right? Don't be a polygamist is in there. But there's also don't go out and get drunk, and, keep your household in check, and some other things. But there's this whole list of things. Not only do they need to be able to teach, we look at some of the positive qualities in there. There's a whole list of things that you need to find someone that's not out there gossiping and tattling and backbiting and slandering people's names. You got to find someone that's not, living sinful lifestyles, because leaders are held to a higher standard. In fact, I don't remember if I have this verse later on, but there's actually a verse that says, don't let too many of you become teachers, because we will be held to a higher standard. James says that. I don't remember where that is in James. So I know it's in James. It's actually in James 3:1. So apparently, I'm going to be bringing that later up. So we'll get to that. But it's the natural course of a believer that you should progress towards maturity. And part of progressing towards maturity is living a blameless and holy life. In Galatians 5:16, Paul says, I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. To me, one of the ultimate signs of maturity of a believer is someone who can walk in the Spirit. Someone who says, I want to be led by God, not led by my own fleshly desires. And those two things are at odds of each other. Well, when we walk in the Spirit, Paul says, you won't sin when you're walking in the Spirit, because that's the opposite of being controlled by the lust of your flesh. So that brings us to that point which says leaders are mature believers who have learned that sin only leads to death, and they find more contentment in the Spirit, which brings life. And so as we progress towards maturity, we start to realize there is way more happiness to be had and contentment and joy to be had in living by the Spirit than there ever was in pursuing sinful lifestyles. And that's just a part of maturity, right? That's not a requirement for salvation, but it's after you get saved, we begin this journey towards maturity. So the fourth thing Jesus brings up in this passage is prioritizing those that need help. In Matthew 18, 10 through 12. So he continues right after just telling people to pluck out their eyes and cut off their feet, right? He says, take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I say to you that in heaven, their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 and go to the mountains and seek the one that is straying? So he says two main things in this passage. Number one, take heed that you do not despise. Do not despise one of these little ones. A leader does not resent anyone that comes under their leadership. But that can be easy to do. That can sometimes be very easy to do that. But a leader does not resent ones that come under their leadership, even if they're difficult, even if they're unlovely or not nice, or just rub you the wrong way. But especially if they're very needy. Jesus specifically said these little ones. Children have constant needs and they demand our attention. Children demand your attention. And sometimes as leaders, you may find someone that just demands your attention. Do not despise them. I thought it was really cute. It was funny. I had this conversation. I don't know if you remember this conversation, Abby, but it was one of the first times I'd ever heard Atticus. He came up and said, "Can we talk? Like, can we have a conversation?" And I thought that was so cute. Like this, he's so little, and that sounds like such a mature statement. Like, can we talk? Like, what kid this high says that? Atticus. Someone with the name Atticus. And I thought that was so cute. So I went over to Abby and I said, "Oh, the cutest thing ever happened today. Atticus came up and said, 'Can we talk?'" And she's like, "Yeah, it's cute until you hear it 20 times in a single day." Like all he wants to do is talk. And I was like, "Oh, it's a different perspective." And like I only heard it once. And she had heard it like 20 times. That's because children demand attention. And if you're a parent of a little child, you understand that. Children demand attention. And Jesus is saying, hey, listen, don't despise one of these little ones, no matter what it is. A leader needs to attend more to the needy and less to those who are capable of being left alone. And that's the second thing he said in that passage. Does he not leave the 99 to go to the mountains to seek the one that is straying? Sometimes as a leader, we have to prioritize who's going to get our attention. Now, what we often want to do is prioritize our friends and prioritize the people who bring life to us and build us up and strengthen us and equip us and do that. And there is a time that you need that. Like you need that. All of us are going to need that, right? I'm not saying like only have needy relationships. That's not healthy. But don't despise those that come into your circle that have needs and that demand attention. We don't do that. But but there has to be a time that we can prioritize that over the other. Because if I say the only people that I minister to are the people that I like and everything, it almost reminds me of Jesus saying, if we only love those who love us, what good is that? Even heathen do that. He's like, but we love our enemies. And now I'm not saying that needy people are enemies. Don't get me wrong, that's all I'm saying. I'm just drawing a parallel. But the point is that sometimes we have to prioritize that and not spend as much time with just people that, hey, are our absolute friends that we just love hanging out with, and say, tonight I'm going to go spend it with this person who actually needs some help, who does that. I can remember having to turn down, an evening that I wanted to spend with Tina to go sit with someone who I ended up staying there for like 3 or 4 hours, where I just sat in silence while they cried on a couch. And that's not a fun evening. I don't think that's anybody's definition of a fun evening. But you have to sometimes make those calls and say that's what they need at that moment. And you just do it because that's what Jesus would do. He actually said, we always quote this as, wouldn't he just leave the 99? We miss the other thing he says, and go to the mountains. Like, it's not easy. The sheep isn't just out, at a lake sitting on a pasture. He decided to go up into the mountains where you have to like hike and go up there. And it's going to be, then he's up there. How are you going to get him back down? That means you're going to have to come down a mountain with a sheep around your neck, right? He didn't say it was going to be easy. It may take time to prioritize those who have needs. It may take money. It may take patience. It may be even harder than that, because it might take seeing from a viewpoint other than your own. And that, for someone like me, is really hard at times, to see outside of myself. And I know that's hard for a lot of people. Going after the one may not be easy. It might be a mountainous climb. It might be scaling down a mountain with someone wrapped around your shoulders. But we are willing to do that because we follow Jesus. So a leader looks to the needs of whomever is in their charge, no matter what. That leader says, I will leave the 99 to attend the one. I will prioritize the needs of others that need it. And there's an ability to recognize some people that just simply don't need quite as much tending to. They don't need my presence in their life every day. Well, probably nobody needs my presence in their life every day, except Tina. She can get it whether she wants it or not. Number 5. This is honestly one that I struggle with myself. I probably have some struggle in all of them, but this one, is confronting sin in others. But as leaders, and basically this is all defined under what Jesus defines as someone who is great, right? Confront sin in others. In Matthew 18, verses 15 through 17, it says, Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. But if he will not hear, take one or two more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. Now, this passage starts off with, if your brother sins against you. Some translations of the Bible leave out the against you and just has if your brother sins. But if you read the context of this, of like bringing other people in and then having it in front of the church, he's not talking about someone who has just hurt your feelings. He's talking about someone who is doing something in sin. They often referred to that as like sinning against people or like sinning against you, it's pretty easy to draw out of this. He's just talking about if you see someone living a lifestyle of sin, they're doing something that is harmful for them. And there's several other places in the Bible that talk about this, how they're doing stuff that can lead them into death, and it's a path of destruction. The point is that this is about someone with a pattern of sin that's under your leadership. When we talk about forgiveness for sins that hurt us, that's the next point. So we'll come to that. But confronting sin in others is hard. We'll just come out right out and just say, that's hard. Well, it should be. If you enjoy that, you might want to think about why. It's hard, but it's necessary. Sin never produces life. Sin can only produce death. And the Bible speaks of sin as working its way throughout the entire church when it's left unchecked. If you bring in someone into the church who just is a constant gossip and a constant, just speaking negatively of other people and tearing people down, it's amazing how if that's left unchecked, other people will find themselves doing too. You get caught up into it. Jesus warns about that. And so we're supposed to confront that when we see that with others, because we're rescuing them from a pattern that's leading them to death. In James 5, 19 through 20, it says, Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. And so there's this real power in this correctiveness and in confronting sin. Now, do I mean like if you see any sin in anybody, you immediately confront them about it? Like somebody walks in, you're just like right on them. That's not what the Bible's talking about. They're talking specifically about patterns. We struggle with things, and people have different people that are allowed to speak into their lives. As talking about leadership, we know that we have a circle of people that we influence and that are in our lives. And that's where being a leader is. We all have these people that are within our sphere of influence. And they're people that we have the right to speak into their lives. But confronting sin is actually love. It's actually loving someone to do that because we're rescuing them from a pattern that leads to death. But if it is love, it means it should look like love. Galatians 6:1, Paul says, Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. And he's not meaning being tempted by the same sin. Like if I confront the sin in someone else, does that mean I'm going to be tempted to do the same thing? No, he's saying, lest you be tempted to confront them in a way that means you yourself are sinning. Like our confrontation can be done without love. And Paul says that's just as bad, right? We don't want to do that. We don't want to be tempted to talk to people harshly and without love. Everything is done with love, with kindness, with gentleness. You know, I love that. Restore such a one with a spirit of gentleness, right? So what we do to love people should actually look like love. I don't know a better way to say that. So leaders must be willing to confront sin in others, even when it is uncomfortable and scary, but it must be done in love. And it is hard. If you've ever done that, if you've ever been in a place of having to do it, it's hard. But that's okay. We can do hard things. And then number 6, the last point that Jesus makes in this passage on being great is that we forgive those that hurt us. In Matthew 18:21 through 22. Now, I am not going to read through the entire parable of this, but it says, Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? And Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Now, Peter probably thought he was being absolutely magnanimous in this. So Jesus has talked about confronting sin, and now Peter kind of interrupts his teachings to ask this question. Well, speaking of sin, if someone sins against me, how oftentimes should I forgive them? And he throws out up to 7 times. Now, why would Peter say up to 7 times? I think for a couple reasons. Number one, living around Jesus, he probably figured out 7 was his favorite number. Like, he just loved 7. So he's like, I'll throw out his favorite number. According to the Talmud something, whatever. I never pronounce words right. They said that there's a passage in, I believe, Hosea, where it basically implies that God was going to forgive a nation up to 3 times. And if on the 3rd time they did not repent, he was going to destroy the nation. So they made a rule in the Talmud that to be a child of God, to be considered a child of God, you must be willing to forgive people 3 times. They're like, if it's good enough for God judging a nation, then that's the rule we live by. So Peter would have known about this. You know, good Jewish guy growing up in that culture, you obviously would have heard this rule being taught all the time. So he knew the Jewish people were commanded to forgive people up to 3 times. Beyond that, it's excessive. Shun them off. So he's probably like, I'm going to blow Jesus's mind and throw out the number 7. Like, should we forgive them up to 7 times? That's like double plus 1, you know? And then Jesus gives an answer back that probably shocked everybody there. I tell you not 7, but 70 times 7, which does not mean 490 times. And if you're counting and keeping track to get to 490, there's something wrong with you. But that was an idiom in that time that just meant continually forever, like infinite number of times. Ad infinitum. They didn't never say ad infinitum. They would have said 70 times 7. So that was a hard saying for them. But for some reason, leaders will attract criticism, hateful comments, lies being told about them, spread around them to others. The Bible says that's true. If you talk to other people, they'll say that's true. I think like only one time in my life I've had someone say something about me that was like, well, I guess maybe a couple times. And maybe more times than I'm remembering. Anyways, you know, yeah, Diane's like, I've been talking about you for months now. No. But those kind of things just need to sort of bounce off of us when we forgive people. There will be times that the people that are within your group that you're leading, or people that are within your sphere of influence, that they'll break commitments. They'll not show up for things that they said they would. They will not do the things that they told you to do. And we forgive them. And there will be people that will, you know, turn on us, or people that will reject you. And we forgive them. And that's a sign of spiritual maturity. The world loves to hate Christians, especially their leaders. Now, you see this in the media all the time. When they go after a church, who do they go after? The pastor. They go after whoever they perceive as in leadership. Well, this is not just true in media. Like when it comes down and you get into churches that start to have cliques and things, and I'm glad none of this exists here. And I'm thankful for that. But you can start getting into very large churches, you'll find little cliques where they'll start, gossiping about people or backbiting or doing these things. And usually it's rare, it does happen that they'll just pick a random member, but usually they're picking someone who is starting to sort of rise in influence within the church. And that's where the criticism is drawn from that way. In James 3:1, we quoted this earlier, it says, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we will receive a stricter judgment." I want you to know there's two different ways you can take this verse, and the context doesn't really help you in figuring out which way to take it. Some people say that that James is talking about receiving just judgment, like would God hold us to a higher standard? And there's some truth to that God does hold leaders to a higher standard. We see that. But also as Christians, if you do a study on judgment, then this really doesn't kind of make sense like that, as like meaning end time judgment. Like, I don't think that at all is what he's talking about, like receiving something stricter at the end time. It doesn't make sense with the rest of the doctrines that go with end time judgment. But what I would say this is probably more apt to be talking about is other people will judge leaders stricter because leaders are held to a higher standard. Like if somebody in the church goes through a problem, people might rally around them. If a leader goes through that same problem, they might be like, well, we got to remove them, get them out of here, kick them out, This used to be a lot stronger earlier in my life. I can remember there was almost no forgiveness for leaders. Like they did anything, boom, you're out of the church, and I do think to an extent it is still like that, not as strong as it was in the early 80s, but it's still there. But the truth is, all that stuff comes against people as you are maturing, as you rise in influence in your Christian faith. It's possible those things will happen. Even if it doesn't, just living life, just being a person, people will hurt you. People will criticize you. People will back out on promises or forget about it, or they'll miss your birthday, or they'll miss your whatever, and they won't tell you that they like your new haircut, or who knows what. All these things can happen. And there are some things that are perceived wrongs. Like I hurt someone one time without ever knowing that I did, because there was just misunderstanding. This was the time that somebody wanted to have a small group in their house, and I was kind of in charge of where small groups would be. And we were at a church that was in Ponte Vedra, and they had a house in Orange Park. And my feeling was that nobody would go to that group because it's too far away. Everybody lived on the other, that we called it on the other side of the ditch. So nobody would for them, it was amazing. The mindset of the people in Ponte Vedra is like, you cannot cross the intercoastal. Like crossing the ditch is such, it's like such an ordeal. We don't do. I was like, so their house was not going to be a good place. Well, I guess I didn't communicate my whole thought process in that. And I said, well, I don't think your house would be a great place to have group. And there was this other person that had a house that was going to be ideal for it in a good location. I said, we're going to have that Bible study in their house. Well, they interpreted that as I didn't feel that their house or their hospitality was good enough for our church. And it really hurt them. And so that's kind of what I would say is a perceived, because that wasn't what I was meaning. What I was just meaning was like, it's just too far. Like there's nothing wrong with your house. There's nothing wrong with your hospitality. It's just 40 miles away, and people won't drive that far. Of course, then I ended up driving 40 miles to church because I moved out that way. But anyways, that's regardless of the point. So sometimes we may have to forgive people for things that were perceived wrongs. Like we might take something in and say, well, we just have to forgive people anyway. We have to humble ourselves too, to ask for forgiveness for things that we maybe didn't even do. And I had to do that. I had to ask for her forgiveness. Of course, at that time, I'm still working on getting over some pride and ego that I struggled with for the early parts of my life. And so I was like, I asked her forgiveness, but then I had to explain why she was also wrong. I don't know. It's not the best way to handle it, but I don't do everything perfect. I know that's a shock. So anyways, those are the 6 points of leadership that Matthew 18 has. And what I do, again, I want to reiterate what I said at the beginning. Even if you don't consider yourself a leader, I want you to understand that other people may. I remember only so many people would have been around when this statement was made, but when Charles Barkley was a fantastic basketball player, and not just like a hilarious commentator, but when he was an actual basketball player, he was kind of known as like a bad boy in basketball. Now, up until Dennis Rodman came around. And then they were like, well, turns out you're not actually that bad. But he was sort of known as a bad boy. And the statement that he used to make all the time is people would actually confront him because they still wanted basketball to have this like purity, this thing. They wanted everyone to be a Michael Jordan and be a positive role model to people at that time, because he was all about encouraging people and whatever else. And they're like, you need to be like that. And in his statement, he would stand up and declare to everyone, I am not a role model. And that was his statement. And the thing that everyone would say to him back was, you don't believe you're a role model. Or maybe you shouldn't be a role model. But in truth, you are a role model. And what I can say is, as a believer, you are a role model. You are a leader, whether you recognize it or not. People will look to you as someone who's been in the faith for a while. You are someone who's been a believer for a while, and they'll say, well, I can learn from them. And they may not formalize it. You may not enter into a one-on-one mentorship with people and have regular meetings and stuff. I'm just telling you, you are influencing people. It is shocking to find out. Sometimes you'll have a conversation with someone and they're like, I remember when you said this and it changed something in my life, or this happened and it changed something in my life. And you're like, I didn't intend that. I don't even remember that happening. But we influence the people that we are around, that we live life with, that we do life with. We're all family here. We're all together, and we all will be influencing each other. So I just encourage you not to look at this and say, well, that's for leaders. It doesn't apply to me. I'm not trying to become great in the kingdom of God. I'm not one of the disciples that would have ever been having that argument. Like, it still applies. This is all a part of just maturing in our faith. So let's pray. Father, we give you glory and praise because you ultimately are the greatest leader. And yet, honestly, you never even pointed to yourself to say, if you want to become great in the kingdom of God, become like me. But you could have, because you are our ultimate role model. And Lord, I pray that you would make these truths come alive in us. I pray that you would remove any thought from anyone that they would be thinking, I'm not great in the kingdom of God, or any thought that someone would have that I'm not a leader. And I pray that you would show them the truth of the relationships, of the friendships, of the influence that they really do truly have. And Father, I pray that you would just burn these principles into us to see your truth, that we can live and be like you and be in you. Lord, we love you and we glorify your name. Amen.